Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Aurum podcast, where we discuss everything regarding building winning teams. Our apologies, our live stream has become has begun a bit late because of technical issues, but here we are, and we are thankful that you have joined us. My name is Anthony Kuria, and I'm so glad that you could join us this Saturday morning. Now, as we said, we've been discussing issues regarding workplace compliance. And last week's edition had a great feedback. We got a lot of feedback, and we thank you, and we are so encouraged that we could continue with this today. But before I continue with my discussions, let me introduce what Aurum Podcast is all about. This podcast is hosted by Aurum Consultants, a human resource and risk advisory company, and we endeavor to help companies build winning teams. And the podcast is done every Saturday morning. We come every Saturday morning via 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 YouTube, via Facebook, and other social media links. So, as I said, we've been discussing the issue of workplace compliance, and I'm so glad that you could join us. And with me is the usual crew that we do have here. We have first Zipporah Kuria, the Managing Director at Aurum Consultants. Welcome, Zippy.
Thank you. Good morning, good evening, viewers, wherever you're watching us from. I'm glad to be here this morning.
Yes, and with us is the consultant to the consultants, uh, the HR specialist, Madam Martha Tuku. Welcome, Martha.
Good morning. Thanks, Tony, and good morning, viewers. I'm so sorry. Today you will not see my face. We are having technical issues, but we are here and we are here to just discuss this thing. Welcome so much to the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. Indeed, even though they don't see you, they can hear you, and your wisdom is not diminished by lacking to be seen. So, as I said, we've been discussing workplace compliance, and this is a very wide subject. In fact, I remember saying last week that even as we were beginning this series of workplace compliance, it is so wide that it cannot even be completed in one podcast, even in two, three, four podcasts. There are so many ways we can be able to look at this particular issue, because compliance is not just about getting a license from the county government or from the city county administration, or getting yourself a license to operate, to have an office and to be professionally qualified. There is a lot more. There are nuances here and there, even in the workplace itself. And these are things that every employer needs to learn and know. And last week's discussion elicited a number of questions that came from you, our viewers. And we felt before we tackle today's session, today we are going to discuss workplace compliance regarding HR policies. There are a few questions that came last week, and we thought let's tackle them first. And the first one that came was a very straightforward question. And the question was, what is the minimum wage? Probably, Zip, you could help our viewers and listeners know from a Kenyan perspective, what is the minimum wage that is legally put in place?
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you for that question. We are glad to our viewers who are able to engage us on these conversations. The minimum wage is the set standards or the set minimum of what we should pay employees, and this is basically set by the government. And if you followed the May 1st proceedings during the Labor Day, the president did give a 12% pay increment. And I think this had not happened for the last 3, 4 years. It had been quite a while since this increment had been given. So there was an increment that was given of 12%. And this pushed the minimum wage to about 15,202 for Nairobi, Mombasa, and Kisumu. And for former municipalities, it was pushed to 14,025 shillings. It's important to note that when these salaries are given, you have to check on the Gazette notice to be sure whether these amounts include the house allowance. A lot of times we don't think about it, but house allowance is also something that, as an employer, you must make sure you include on the total pay you're giving your employee. Because when you don't do that and you start having challenges, then you start realizing, when employees say, I was not paid my minimum wage, I was not I was not paid the house allowance, and you start wondering where this is all coming from. So it's important for us to understand, yes, there's a minimum wage, which is actually gazetted. The Gazette notice came out sometime in July. So if you're not compliant, then my advice would be you need to actually comply and you need to backdate this back to May. Otherwise, you might find yourself in a situation where you have paid people below the minimum wage, and this could be a legal issue.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that question. That's a very straightforward question that you've answered, Zippy. Because of time, let me go to the second one, which probably, I don't know, Martha probably can give us the answer. The second question that we were asked was, is it in order to hire from a referral even if you have a hiring process? Martha, from your perspective, what's your take?
Okay, thanks, Anthony, and thanks for that question. I would say that for me, and this is what I practice, I really don't mind referrals, especially from people who I know they are credible. However, the policy must be followed. The policy in our organization is that you advertise the position and people compete. I always tell people, if you are being referred, you still have to follow you apply as per guidelines in the advert, and because you have been recommended, you'll be highly one of the shortlists. And then you compete with the others, and you really have to prove yourself. Why? Because even if you have been referred to me, I don't know you. I can only know you through an interview, um, and unless the referrals for headhunting, like when we know, and like Tony, you are known in the market. I see a lot of it happening, especially in the banking industry. The positions are the top because people can see what someone is doing. You just find a lot of headhunting, and this is different from referral because the organization knows this person, and you need to add his package so that he can come work with you. But for referral, for me, I still want someone to go through the interview and compete with others and see whether they are standing out, because during audit I'll still have to show how competitively we have recruited that person. So it is a good thing to be referred, and this happens all the time. But every referral myself I receive, they have to apply for that position. Thank you.
Wow. Yeah, I think you sum it up, Martha, very well. For anyone who is listening, if you're an employer, if you're a HR manager somewhere, if you're a director, and you're wondering, okay, I want to follow due process. So is it good to do it? Martha has answered it perfectly.
Let
You
me just
refer
add
this.
something into what
Yes.
Mother said.
Yes.
When you are looking at headhunting, because Mother has alluded to that,
Yes.
it's important for us to actually know when you are headhunting someone, there's a lot of background checks that have been done on you. So we already have too much information from you, even as you're coming to us. So that is important for us to note. Now, on the issue of referrals, I have seen a lot of challenges, especially with SMEs on this particular aspect, where actually we violate our own processes. Simply because someone has been sent to me by someone I know, I feel I don't have to follow the process and we violate that process. And I think, as Mother has put it, it's important for us to be very clear. Yes, it's okay to get referrals, but let's make sure we don't violate our processes and we follow due process to recruit. One of the challenges you will find with referrals when they don't go through a process, there's always a mind of entitlement. There's always a feeling of, the boss brought me or this person knows me. And it starts becoming a bit of a challenge within the organization. So it's important to actually follow what Mother has alluded, that we need to follow the process in recruitment, assuming we
Yes.
have one.
Thank you, Zippy. That's a very good point. Indeed, we have seen that as a consultancy. We have seen those who have been referred having an attitude simply because they did not go through the same process of the same rigorous hiring process like everyone else. The third question that came last week, and this somebody put it this way: compliance is real. I once terminated and had to pay 2 months' salary to the terminated staff. We agreed the employee resigns because of toxic behavior. Now, okay. Now the question is, what do you think about that? What would you advise the person who made this comment? So less to do with the question. I think they were responding to a comment we made. So how do you emphasize this point that the viewer and this was having?
So it's important for us to think about the risk areas of engaging an employee. And the risk comes when we are engaging and how we engage. And that could create a situation where you might end up facing some litigations in the future if that engagement, and especially from a contractual perspective, was not done right. The other risk area is how the employee is managed, the process of managing that employee within the organization. Sometimes you'll find an organization where relationships have become so toxic, like what the viewer is talking about, where it becomes difficult to work with other people, or maybe just a work environment becomes unbearable, and it could lead to an employee resigning. And we've had, employees suing the employer and saying that it was a constructive dismissal. And sometimes it comes from such kind of a situation. The other risk area we need to be aware of is the process of terminating. How we actually end up separating an employee is so critical, and we have to make sure we comply with the law in the way we exit an employee or in the way we separate. Whether it's employees resigning or whether it's employer terminating is very, very critical. Now, it's good this viewer did agree with the employee that yes, you need to resign because of the toxic behavior, but there's also still a risk. There's an exposure that could come out of this, and I would not want to elaborate this because we're in an online platform, but they could reach out to us and we could be able to guide them on some of these issues. But I would actually say it's very important for us to follow the due process. Now, how do we understand what the due process is? There's a labor laws, which I believe we'll talk a bit about. There's a policies that we want to talk about today, because if it's not covered within the labor laws, then you also need to have your own policies. How do you follow due process to terminate? One of the things you will find in the court when employees go to court, employers will be accused of unfair and unprocedural termination. Now, unfair, depending on whatever the reason was. Was there fairness in the way the termination happened? In terms of procedure, was there a procedure that was actually followed to get to the point of terminating? And was that procedure fair? So we have to understand these, intricacies that are used within the boundaries of the law that will turn against us as employers when we don't use it the way we are supposed to use. So very important for us to look at what does the law say, what does our policy say, and it's also not about what the policy is saying. Do the employees understand? Are they being trained? Are they aware of the things that could make them end up being terminated if they violate certain
Mm,
laws? I've seen situations where an employee is terminated because they had a gross misconduct, and maybe it was not an outright gross misconduct. It was a series of many things that led to their termination. And this employee would come back and challenge and say, I am not aware. And I've seen this in situations where there are unions, and the union will actually tell you, show us where they have signed that you've trained them on this policy. So, very important for us to actually just understand some of these challenges, because it's part of the compliance. And like you rightfully put it, compliance is not when we are talking about the documents and all the things we need to put in place when we are starting an organization. It's also about how we run the organization and how we manage the people that we're working with. It's a big part of compliance. Very important.
thank you, Zibi. That gives our viewer a very good idea of where the
Hi,
questions were
Tony.
coming from.
I wanted to
Yes,
put,
Martha.
I wanted
Yes,
to
Martha.
just put in, in reality, in organizations, when I look at this comment by this person, when you look at reality, you know that this person you don't want to work with them, but and you can see it's because of toxic behavior. And toxic behavior, I'm not sure how you are able to follow uh, things that will help you terminate this person. So for me, I would agree with whatever decision they made to make the person resign. Because once it's the person who has resigned, then there's little exposure, because then it is not them who have terminated. It could have been a problem if they are the ones who terminated. But it's good to, when you have something like this, and I'm sure by the time these discussions reached here, there could have been many, many reasons that made this come to this point, and it was a way to part ways, and using agreeing with the person to resign for this particular case. For me, I would agree with them totally. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Martha. Thank you, Zippy. You've given our viewers and listeners a glance on the what do you call it, on the practicalities that come with compliance, or even issues regarding how do you part ways, how do you hire. And Zippy alluded to the idea that in order for you to make sure that you're compliant with the labor laws, then you've got to be sure that from the time you come in, by the time you're hiring the staff, how are you hiring them? Like now we spoke the previous question concerning referrals and things like that. So are you following the process from the beginning procedurally? How do you handle disciplinaries? How do you handle promotions? How do you have to make sure that you as an employer are meeting your end of compliance, so that by the time you are, the situation say becomes toxic, as our viewer was seeing last week, then you know the procedure to follow. We as our own consultants can come in to help you know that, okay, this is the procedure to follow. This is how you follow termination according to the employment law. So that if that employee, it is the point where they've decided, you know what, I think I'm toxic enough. I also don't like working for this employer, and they decide to leave. If they come back to look for claims to be paid, if you've followed procedure, if you're complied with employment law regarding how to release an employer, tell them, okay, let's discuss. What do you want? What is it that you think we have not done right? And even if they had a union representative or they had legal counsel, if you followed the right procedure as to how to exit the employee, yeah, inakuwa tuonane. Thank you, it's been real. We owe you nothing, you owe us nothing. We wish you all the best, and life moves on. And that's why today we want to discuss about HR policies when it comes to workplace compliance. And like last week, we would appreciate questions, we would appreciate comments as we are discussing these things. We would appreciate you if you are listening to us and you'd want to know that discussion sounds very interesting, and I would want to know more about these things. Kindly listen in, find your questions, and we would be glad to solve them. Now, today, as we discuss workplace compliance, with regards to HR policies, we are saying HR policies are the guidelines that help shape an organization's approach to managing its human resources. They can cover a wide range of topics, from employee benefits and leave policies to recruitment and training procedures. So today we want to look deeper into the importance of HR policies and how to formulate them. So, Zippy, let me begin with the first question that probably somebody would sit and think, and they would wonder, what is the importance? Is it necessary to have policies to ensure compliance when managing staff?
Thank you, Anthony. Yes, it's important to have policies, and a lot of times I think this is an area as organizations ignore a lot. And we don't keenly think about the policies that we need to have. And when I'm talking about organizations, I'm talking about majorly SMEs. Big corporates, you will find they have policies which they review every now and then. But it's important for us to have policies because when you look at the labor laws, they are not entirely conclusive in terms of how you manage employees. You will realize as you manage people, there are challenges that would come that are not necessarily outrightly addressed in the labor laws. And what happens when the labor laws don't define a situation that you need to address? Of course, your fallback plan will be policies that you put in place, and you've discussed the same with employees. Now, on the other flip side of it, when you're coming up with policies, you also must make sure they're in tandem with what the labor law says. So you cannot come and create policies that are out of this world that don't make any legal sense because they could be challenged in a court of law. Now, when I'm looking at having policies, one of the things I've realized when you have policies, it helps you create a desired culture for the organization. Okay. Um, you will see, for instance, like the Employment Act will tell you that you need to define working hours for your employees. Now, if you don't have a clear policy of what your working hours are like within the organization, then you leave it to employees to make a guess or decide when they can work, how they should work. And what happens creates a lot of chaos, creates a lot of situations where people are unhappy because you've not given any clear guidance. You will find the labor laws will tell you the leave allowable to an employee per year is 21 days. You can't come and decide you want to give 15 days. You have to give at least a minimum within the law. But as an organization, you might realize you want to give more, you want to give 30 days. But how do you define that? How do you give direction to the employees? How does HR know? How do I implement these 30 days? Are people aware, and how do they apply for it? And how do we make sure it doesn't end up becoming, again, a liability and negative to the organization? So one of the things I would say, yes, they're important in having, because they complement what you have in terms of the labor laws, and they would guide the running of the organization and how you manage your people. And that means you create the culture you desire as an organization, how you expect people to behave within the organization. The other thing I think the policies will do for you is they will help people be accountable. Now, when people are put within boundaries and they are held accountable, then you find it becomes easier for them to follow through with expectations. When there are no boundaries, then becomes a bit of a challenge, and accountability becomes an issue. When there's an accountability issue, and we've interacted with different clients where you find in an organization there's no accountability, and the client is saying we are having all these challenges with people. But when you dig deep inside, you realize again there's no clear direction, and there's a lot of assumptions, both from the employee and from the employer. And what happens when the assumption? Misunderstandings happen. Of course, the other thing is to identify any challenges that would come and make sure any anomalies are addressed through policy. Um, Mother, the other day, I think she was talking about we have a policy, and I think this policy has been there for a while. Um, the what do you call it? Mother, remind me the new policy on safeguarding.
Safeguarding. Mm-hmm.
Safeguarding policy. You will find most organizations they are dealing with children, and you will find the law actually requires you to have a safeguarding policy. If you go to the labor laws, it will not explicitly tell you some of these things, but how do you define how people should behave where minors are concerned? When you look at, for example, the education industry, you will find they need to discipline children, for instance. How do they ensure they're safeguarding and how they handle that? You will find there are issues that will touch on social issues, like, a child can be molested, they can be sexually abused. How do you address these issues? So it means we need to have policies in place, policies that employees are actually trained on and they understand. Because some of them actually touch on social responsibility and social and moral behaviors. How do we expect people to behave when they're working for us? So I think, yes, it's important to have policies in our workplace and make sure they're compliant with the law as well.
Okay, wow, that's a very comprehensive answer. Martha, what's your view on the same, the importance of HR policies in policies in ensuring compliance when managing staff? What's your take on the same?
My take is that policies are, and I agree with ZP totally, that policies are actually like the boundaries that you work within an organization. And so it is important to have them because they provide guidance and consistency. The challenge of not having policy, then it means that you will use your mind to make decisions, especially on people. And because now, if Tony, you don't like my face, the decision you make concerning me will be different from the one you make for Zippy. And so that brings a lot of issues in the organization, disharmony. The climate is not good when you operate that way. Also, the policies bring accountability. They bring efficiency. You're clear on how you do, because what happens in the operations of the organization, it is out of these policies that then you come up with procedures, or what I can call SOPs. So these two, they provide like is it a guideline or a roadmap, a blueprint for day-to-day running of the
Yes,
operations. They
yes.
actually ensure you comply with legal and legislature. The risks, they help minimize risk, because when you are doing the policies, then you're using the labor laws to ensure that your policies are in line. So as far as policies are concerned, the minimum you should have is what is the law. And then now, if you want to do more, you are allowed, but you can't do less than the minimum of the labor laws. They also guide in your decision making. So if you are stuck with a situation, what does the policy say? So you go there and you're able to streamline the things that you're doing. You're able to streamline even your own internal processes. Um, so that's why for me it is important to have the policies. Some organizations actually have policies, Tony, but they would not be any good if they are not being followed. If you're a director in your SME, in your organization, you
Sure.
want to say you have policies so that you show people when they come in, like the government,
Yeah.
but internally you don't use them. They are not good to your organization. That's what
Very
I can
true.
say about policies. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. You have really brought a very important point to our viewers and listeners. If you're listening like me, and you are thinking, wow, those are sounding very nice. So for me to summarize what both Zippy and Martha has said, is that HR policies work in tandem with employment law. The employment law is the foundation by which we all follow. Any HR in a workplace, they endeavor to ensure that the employment law is established. We are working in a workplace using the employment law. Now we build on that. Now, as a company, now you customize, you add on to it. If it says the employment law says X number of days is the minimum that you can have for leave, for example, or things like paternity leave and maternity leave. Now you customize. Now from there, you build up HR policies. Now from there, and I like what Zippy has said, that when you put in place policies, they help create company culture and strengthen your identity. Your corporate identity, your brand is strengthened when you not only put in policies, but also you put them down, and then you now put them into practice. They help strengthen your culture, and I mean, they help create a company culture and strengthen your identity. And then, Martha, you've also brought in something very important, that policies lead to standard operating procedures. So it's using policies that you now put in standard operating procedures. How do we handle issues, for example, of drunkenness? How do we handle, because there could be certain issues that are emerging, as Zippy said earlier, the employment law is not very detailed. It does not cover every emerging issue. But when you have HR policies, then that is where now you're able to know, how do we handle issues like, for example, drunkenness, or somebody, there are those gray areas. So as a company, by having HR policies, then you know how to tackle emerging issues regarding your work, regarding your staff, uh, as you go. Now, the second question that comes in, and these questions come in, as we are discussing. If you have a question as a viewer, as our listener, if you have questions, if you're a HR practitioner out there, if you're a director, you have questions, you're wondering, okay, you guys have brought in some very interesting insights, and I have a question, I have a scenario. Like, for example, Zippy, the other day we were discussing about the breathalyzer that has been authorized. Companies nowadays feel they have to bring in breathalyzers. How do you administer these within an organization? Those are questions that are now coming up because, unlike our fathers who used to drink after work, the current generation, the people who it's easy to get a tot, and instead of taking a cup of coffee in the morning, you take a tot of whiskey to go to work. Now, those, Martha, you can agree with me, those are emerging those are emerging issues. And as employers, we are dealing with the same. So those are questions that within your HR policy, if you have a competent and capable HR, or you have a consultant like Aurum Consultants helping you managing these things. So these are emerging issues that will come up, and your HR should be competent enough to be able to see how do we handle this within employment law, because you've got to guard yourself also as an employer. So now, the second question that pops up in my mind regarding HR policies and audits: what does compliance mean when managing employees? What areas should employers be keen to look at? Zippy, what does compliance mean when managing employees? Somebody out there is an SME, is listening to us and wondering, you people are talking a lot of jargon. Can we break it down for them? What does compliance mean when it comes to managing employees?
I think I want to put that in very simple term. Mm, Compliance is basically following through with what is expected, whether by law or whether by what is set as a standard within the organization. And if that standard is not set, then we need to set it. Now, when you have um, policies that you need to implement and you need to be compliant, one of the things it ensures is consistency. It ensures people are treated the same across board. It ensures the way you treat Martha if she has committed an offense or if she has done something very good is the same way you will treat Zipporah. You will not treat one this way and the other one in a different way, to avoid issues of discrimination, to avoid issues of employees feeling disconnected and feeling that there are different camps within the organization. So in a very simple way, I would say is to follow through with what has been set as the standards for the organization and within the law. Now, there are many areas of compliance when it comes to HR. And I think I'll just touch on this very briefly. And like you said, this is a very wide topic that I believe we'll probably need to engage a little bit further. And one of the areas is the area of contracts. When we're engaging employees in terms of compliance, how are we engaging them? Are we giving them contracts? What kind of contracts are we? I've seen situations where I'm asked a question. I've had this employee for the last 5 years without a contract. Why do I need to give them a contract now? Why can't I just wake up and terminate them tomorrow? They don't have a contract anyway.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And these are very common questions, interestingly. And sometimes I don't know whether it's lack of capacity building for employers to just understand, what the law says, because there's an implied contract, whether it's written or not. And that means you have to follow the law to the letter if you're going to terminate that contract.
Mm,
There are other areas like the way we terminate employees. What is the process of terminating an employee? Do I wake up and I want to terminate? Again, I've seen situations where, I wake up in the morning and I feel this employee is not performing for whatever reason, and I don't want to work with them. And as a manager, I walk to HR and I say, terminate this employee. Also, as a director, I tell HR, I want this person out. Yet there's no clear process of how this person needs to be handled. Some actually very petty issues that are raised, and simply you just want to get someone out because it's something you didn't like about them. Uh,
Mm.
how do we manage employee grievances? Are we compliant in the way we are managing it? Because employees will come with different issues, some from work, some from home. We have a clear, defined way of how we handle some of these things. And I think there are a
Mm.
lot of many other areas in terms of HR compliance where we can talk about how we manage, how do we handle the disciplinaries? I have come to work late today. Next week I come to work late, or I commit a totally different offense. What is the process of dealing with me? How compliant are we in terms of setting the processes and the systems to help us know how we are going to deal with each and every situation that arises when you're dealing with people? And sometimes I know when you're talking about this, it almost feels like dealing with people is such a difficult task. And the truth is, we
Mm.
can't live without people. We need people, but we also have to help them know how do we live within this community so that we are living together in harmony and we are delivering to our customer what we've started to do. Yeah, so that would be my take on that.
That's a very good point. You've brought in very well that issues regarding standards. The reason why we have compliance is to set standards that are equal, that are made, that are affecting everyone. For example, contracts. Martha, uh, I'm sure this one you can. I'm sure you have a lot of answers to this. But give us your take. Somebody coming to ask you, Martha, why? What does it mean to have compliance while managing employees? What's your take? And especially now that you've been in the corporate world, in the HR aspect for a while.
Yeah, yes, Tony, I really agree with Zippy on the areas of compliance. For
Mm.
me, I would want to add that compliance, first of all, it means ensuring employees and activities across the organization are adhering or in line with the laws of the land,
Mm.
the laws and the regulations of the land, and what
Mm.
is required even by the organization. And
Yes.
you'll find these requirements can also be from various other entities. Like I
Mm.
work in an NGO, we also
Mm.
have rules and regulations
Mm.
governing how we operate that are
Mm.
set by the donors who we
Mm.
work with. So we have
Mm.
to comply with those rules and regulations.
Regulations.
You
Yes.
will also find other areas like when I was in the bank, there was the union, and the banking industry had to comply with the laws of the union. Now,
Mm.
this is in addition to the
Mm.
labor laws, you know.
Mm. Yes.
So you'll find in industries,
Mm.
like those chemical industries, there are
Yes.
industry bodies that have regulations,
Mm.
especially on what are these the PPEs,
Mm.
um, how you
Protective
protect
equipment.
your
Mm.
staff.
Yes.
So in every industry there are rules and regulations to
Yes.
follow, in
Yes.
addition to the labor laws that
Yes.
govern that
Yes.
industry that you are in. So
Yes.
compliance, it's wide for
Yes.
each organization based
Mm.
on what
Mm.
what you are doing and which industry you are in. That's my
Yes.
take on that. Thank you.
Wow, Martha, you've brought in some very interesting aspects. Do you, any entrepreneur, any director in there, we have people here who, the term SME or corporate encompasses all industries. We are talking from hospitality, we're talking about education, we're talking about things like the way Martha you've said, industries, the industrial sector. And manufacturing is everything from foods to chemicals. There are people in the banking industry, there are people in the service, like banking, is the NGO world. So, to you, our listener, from what you've heard, the issue of compliance when managing employees basically means you have the minimum employment law that you have to meet, which is subject to everybody operating in the Republic of Kenya. And then now there is what is specific to your industry. For example, as Martha has put it, and as Zippy has put it, you have the need to ensure standards internally for all. For example, if it's issues regarding contracts, issues regarding leave, issues regarding disciplinary, issues regarding promotion. That is the internal requirements which you want to put in place in order to help you create a culture. And then there is what is external. Martha, you've alluded to that. For example, if you're in the NGO world, what do the financial donors require? If you're in the financial sector, you're a bank, there are certain minimum requirements that the regulator, Central Bank of Kenya, requires you to be in. If you're in insurance, there is what the regulator also wants you to do. If you're in schools, there is what the government, the Ministry of Education, requires you to have in place. If you are, whatever, if you're in manufacturing, you are a building contractor, there is what the National Construction Authority requires you to have in addition. So, as I said earlier, compliance is wide, but the center here, the central aspect we're discussing here, and ladies, you'll agree with me, is the issue of managing employees. Managing employees, whether they're in schools, whether they're in a construction site, whether they're in a bank, whether they're in a HR, in a NGO, whether they are working in a ship, everything regarding the employees. So you as an employer have to know what works for you within the area that you're working with. Ladies, we have really dissected this thing very well, and our time has really gone. And we have barely scratched the surface. We have barely, when it comes to HR. I don't know, Zippy, whether we'll continue with this next week or we will look at another different aspect of workplace compliance.
I think we will look at different places, but we'll see whether there are other areas we need to touch on the same as well. That is
Exactly.
a wide
And
topic that I think might go on for a while.
yes, yes, that is
And I
very
like
true.
the idea, even if we will do something different, I like the
Yes,
idea that our viewers would come up with questions
yes,
for what we have discussed, how they would
yes,
want us to comment on things. I like that idea. So we are also encouraging more of that. Thank
exactly.
you.
Exactly. And since we are live on Facebook, we are live on YouTube, even if you find that the podcast is done and the live session is done, send in your questions. Today we discussed questions that we handled that came last week after the session had been closed. So to you, our viewer and our listener, if what we are discussing today concerning HR policies is something you're thinking, okay, I should have asked this during the live session. No, don't worry. Just send the question. Send in the comment. Next week, when we do the live session, we will tackle them as we go. And having said that, we have come to the end of our podcast today. And we appreciate that you took your time to join with us. And if you have any questions, you have any comments, our contacts are at the bottom of your screen. You can get in touch with us via phone, via website, via social media contacts, through LinkedIn, through Facebook, through YouTube. We would be glad to answer the question. As I said, even if the live session is already done, feel free to still send in your comments and questions. We would love to look at them even as we come live next week. And we here at Aurum Consultants would be glad to help you. Uh, if you are struggling with workplace compliance, you've heard a story here and you're wondering, what? That is something that I've been suffering, and I'm about to face the music either with the Ministry of Labor or my employer is threatening to take me to court, or you're thinking, I think you guys have touched a raw nerve regarding setting up, I've set the policies, but I've never followed them up, and I wonder how to do it. Don't feel shy. Get in touch with us here at Aurum Consultants. We would love to get in to come and help you put things in place. If you have an employer, Zippy said, who has 5 years, an implied contract, and you're wondering, how do I handle this? Get in touch with us. We would love to come in and help you set things in place. As we say, here we help build winning teams, and we would love to come and help you do the same. So Zippy and Martha, thank you for your contributions. Indeed, today was a very interesting discussion. As you ladies were talking, I was just taking notes, like an interested listener, because I'm also learning a lot, and we appreciate your insights and understanding. So, having said that, we've come to the end of our podcast. We look forward. Next week, we'll still be discussing workplace compliance. As I said, this is a very wide topic. So we'll discuss it in a different angle regarding workplace compliance. So make sure you join us next Saturday, same time, 9 o'clock East African time. Kindly make sure that you join us to hear more, and if you have questions, to get your queries answered. Thank you very much. God bless you.